welcome to the story of Marsha P. Washington. Before I begin, I must warn you that the subject of sexual abuse will be discussed within this presentation. There is not much detail that I can present regarding that matter, however, it will briefly be mentioned. Now, to begin Marsha's story. Marsha P. Johnson was born on August 24, 1945, as Malcolm Michaels Jr. in Elizabeth, New Jersey. She was the daughter of Malcolm Michaels Sr. and Alberta Claiborne. Her father worked as an assembly line worker at a General Motors factory, and her mother took up work as a housekeeper. Marsha was born as the fifth of 7 children into this working-class family. Growing up feeling trapped in the wrong body, she began to express this inner sensation by wearing dresses at the age of 5. Of course, since this is the early 1950s, this was completely against societal norms and absolutely unjust behavior from a black boy. Being a freshly graduated student, Marsha found herself in search of any work possible. She began to sell herself as a sex worker in order to have some flow of income. She created a persona for herself in order to aid in her line of work. She altered between being known as Malcolm, her birth name, and Black Marsha. She often worked with male clientele, as so she referred to herself using female pronouns, gay, a transvestite, or simply a queen, which she most definitely was. She continued with this line of work for roughly 30 years. Of course, being the 1960s, 1970s, the ideas of same-sex relations and people identifying with a different sex in which they were born was absolutely unacceptable. Marsha was arrested a countless number of times, in which she states that she stopped counting after the 100th time. As stated in a New York Times article, it was not an easy time to live outside the sexual mainstream. Although New York State downgraded sodomy from a felony to a misdemeanor in 1950, persecution of gay people and criminalization of their activities were still common. Same-sex dancing in public was prohibited. The state liquor authority banned bars from serving gay people alcoholic beverages. People could be charged with sexual deviancy for cross-dressing. Police enforcement was often arbitrary. Marsha P. Johnson is most known for her diligence and activism during the raid of Stonewall Inn on June 28, 1969. The Stonewall Inn was a known gay bar in Greenwich Village in New York. In order to fully understand the tragic event that occurred during the early hours on that fateful day, the full history of gay liberation should be noted. Now, in 1966, 3 years before the raid, activists' efforts did not go to waste, as it was now legal for those a part of the LGBT community to be served alcohol. However, it was still illegal for any same-sex behavior to be performed in public. It would not be uncommon for intoxicated individuals to participate in these illegal acts, such as holding hands or hugging, and as a result, police raids were an often occurrence at these gay bars. Those who were arrested were not done so with any form of respect as a human being. Thankfully, members of the Metatchin Society, which was an organization that dedicated themselves to gay rights, organized what they called a sip-in. In these sit-in inspired protests, individuals would openly disclose their sexuality and expressed that it was their right to be served in bars. As a result, police raids were temporarily reduced. It should be noted that many of these gay bars, including the Stonewall Inn, were owned by the mafia. The Stonewall Inn remained one of the few nightclubs that welcomed anyone and everyone. While raids were still a far too common occurrence, some corrupt police officers would warn these mafia-run bars in order to prevent arrests of attendees. Unfortunately, the raid taking place at the Stonewall Inn was not tipped off and ended up with 13 people being arrested that night, one of which being Marsha P. Johnson. It is known that Marsha was one of the people on the front lines that can be known as one of the instigators of this chaotic scene. The Stonewall Inn raid is the event that began the gay revolution. A year later, in 1970, the first Gay Pride Parade took place, And in that same year, Marsha P. Johnson and her good friend Sylvia Rivera, another transgender woman, founded the Star House. Star House was an escape for those who came from unaccepting and dangerous environments. STAR was an acronym for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. Johnson and Rivera would give those in need shelter, food, and clothing. The environment of Star House was the perfect embodiment of Johnson herself. She was known to these young advocates as a motherly figure, filled to the brim with pure love and compassion for others. The 1970s were a pivotal yet nerve-wracking and emotional few years for Marsha. She experienced a number of breakdowns in 1970 and was often in and out of psychiatric care facilities. Then, in 1972, Marsha began performing as a drag queen. She dressed in beautiful, flamboyant robes and dresses, red plastic high heels, stockings, and a crown constructed out of artificial fruits. Every time a judge of drag would ask what the P in her name stood for, she would always respond with, "Pay it no mind," and thus Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson was born. She gained attention from photographer Andy Warhol and was published in one of his collections titled Ladies and Gentlemen in 1975. It was after this that things began looking up for Marsha, and when her mind was set on the Star House, she was able to concentrate on her passion of helping those that came from the same environment as she. In 1980, Johnson was asked to ride on the lead car of New York's annual Pride Parade and moved in with a close friend, Randy Wicker, and his lover, David Combs. Combs was unfortunately diagnosed with AIDS, and Marsha spent his final years as his carer. In 1990, David Combs passed away due to his AIDS infection. Overcome with grief, Marsha began to attend protests and meetings of AIDS advocacy organization ACT UP. 2 years later, Marsha P. Johnson disclosed in an interview that she had been HIV positive for the past 2 years. This was her last interview. On the morning of July 6, 1992, Marsha P. Johnson's body was found floating in the Hudson River. Her death was quickly ruled as a suicide, but the strong questioning of her friends and peers caused authorities to reclassify her death as a drowning with undetermined causes. In 2012, her case was reopened and is yet to have new information. To this day, the death of Marsha P. Johnson remains unsolved. While the means of her death may not ever be known, her life most definitely had a center point to it. Marsha P. Johnson spent her 46 years of life with the purpose and the drive of helping others. While Star House is no longer standing, the legacy and the love shared by Marsha can never be destroyed.